Let's say we have a new leader stepping into a new leadership role and having these doubts and thoughts and sleepless nights. What is a good recommendation for them?
I remember standing in front of all of them and introducing myself. That was the first moment where it dawned on me that whatever I do and whatever I say is going to have an immediate impact on the impression they have of me.
Daniel Van Otterdijk, Group Chief Communications and Government Relations Officer at DP World, leading global communications and stakeholder strategy for one of the world's largest logistics companies across 6 continents.
When I had the executive chairman and CEO of DMCC, Ahmed bin Sulayem, he mentioned your name. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, I'm flattered that he did. I had a mentor by the name of Neil Golightly. He had sort of 3 very simple rules, first and foremost.
What is the legacy you would like to leave behind?
I have a really good answer to that.
Hey, quick note. If you are listening to this podcast but not following it, hit the subscribe button. It really helps the show and helps me bring even more great leaders into the conversations. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode.
Welcome to another episode of Leading by Example. My guest today is the Group Chief Communication and Government Relations Officer at DP World, which is one of the world's largest companies within logistics and supply chain with more than 100,000 employees. So when he speaks, it doesn't just affect his company, it affects the entire globe. And that requires a lot of leadership and obviously great communication. So I'm very excited to have Daniel Van Otterdijk here in the studio today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into your whole leadership journey, the reason why you're here today is, of course, well, first of all, because I have a podcast on leadership and I work with leadership development on a daily basis. So it's always great to get these insights from top executives. But the second reason is that at the end of each episode, I always ask my guest if there is another great inspirational leader out here in Dubai that could be great for my podcast. And when I had the executive chairman and CEO of DMCC, Ahmed bin Sulayem, he mentioned your name. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, I'm flattered that he did. Ahmed is for me also an inspirational leader. What he has done, like his father, is built ecosystems of prosperity, as I call it. So if you look at the journey that Dubai has been on in the last sort of 50 plus years that the nation has existed, it is nothing short of remarkable, which is why we're all here after all, right? To be part of that journey. And if I look at JAFSA, for example, and I look at DMCC, those are great examples of what Dubai as a city and an emirate has stood for, to build, to construct, to create prosperity, to create value, not just for company customers, but for people as well. So both Ahmed and his father Sultan have been inspirational leaders, not just for me, but I think for thousands and thousands of people, for what they've done, what they've created. And Sultan in particular, as my one of my leaders, he is a character who only continues to look forward and look for growth. And I've learned many things from him. But one of the things that always stuck with me when we talk about achievements is that when I say to him, for example, Chairman, aren't you proud of what you've achieved on this particular project or on that particular segment? His answer is always, that's great, but I have plenty of time to think about that when I'm retired, on to the next one. And I think Ahmed is very much the same. He's continually looking for, the next thing that can grow or that can be created or that can add value. And to have that energy and that passion for what you do and to never waver from that and to never stop is a remarkable thing. And I think that's part of the DNA of Dubai.
Yeah, definitely. And when I spoke with Ahmed, it was very macro, very high level, because he had so many ideas and he had so many areas of interest that really got him going. But okay, so this podcast is about your leadership journey, and I know you're probably more used to speaking about the company and the journey you're on as a company and the direction you are going. But I'm very curious about your whole leadership journey, because myself and my listeners are typically between the age of late 20s to mid 40s. And all of them, or most of them, are interested in leadership. That's why they're listening. But also they are on their own leadership career path. And I'm sure that there's a lot of things from your journey that we can learn from that. So before we get into that leadership journey of yours, why don't you give us a short introduction to who is, do I call you Daniel or Danny?
Either is fine.
Okay, so who is Danny Van Otterdijk?
Gosh, well, I'm a Dutch national, born and raised in the Netherlands, very proud of that, in the southeast of the Netherlands. in a place called Zomeren, which is about 20 or so kilometers from a larger town called Eindhoven, which is famous for the company called Philips Electrical Industries. In fact, it used to be known as the Philips City. And in the 80s, my parents immigrated to New Zealand, and I ended up living and then subsequently working in Wellington, in the capital city, where I met my current wife. We undertook a journey to move to London in the late 90s, in fact, in 1999. And obviously established there. I worked for Shell for many years, for nearly 18 years, Royal Dutch Shell. And I think a lot of my leadership traits, if you like, and learnings came from that period.
Mm-hmm. Shell is also a Dutch company.
It's Royal Dutch Shell is the official name.
Yeah.
It's a British Dutch company. So I think, from there, from the UK coming here, was actually quite a natural transition at the time when I decided to move to Dubai and to join DP World. It was nowhere near as hard as people might have thought, because it was actually a very easy transition. First of all, from a job perspective, it was taking a lot of what I had learned at Shell and applying it at DP World. But also from a moving perspective, having moved to different parts of the world,
it was natural for you.
It gets easier as you do more of it. But also I find Dubai is a very easy city to move to. Yeah. It's when you get here, things are already in place. The schools are great. The housing is fantastic. Shopping, leisure, all these activities are very easy to get into. So my journey has been an interesting one, and it's taken me to all corners of the world. And I've really enjoyed that. But I think, if we talk about leadership traits and learnings, a lot of that has come from, that period in the UK and certainly here. Yeah.
So tell us about your current role. We will get into, the journey again, but what are you doing right now?
Well, if I go back to what is now nearly an 8-year journey, I remember talking to Sultan bin Sulayem in my interview about this role. And one of the reasons I was so excited about joining DP World is the vision that he had for the company, and what role I was to play in it. And the vision was actually simple, but he articulated it so well and so clearly that in and of itself created excitement for me. And then if I look at his journey of becoming chairman and CEO of the company, and if you look at what he had done, I knew that he had not only the ability to do what he said he was going to do, but also he had the wherewithal to deliver it. And it was actually a fairly simple journey. He said, look, we're a port operator, and today we have, a dozen or so companies that are our customers, shipping lines. But all these shipping lines are creating alliances, and therefore it's becoming harder for us to maintain our margins, harder for us to protect our revenue, and therefore we need to start looking outside the port gate for new business. So he said, it's very simple. I want to become an end-to-end logistics company, not just a port operator. I want to pick up the cargo from where it's produced, be it a farm, a factory, or an assembly line, and deliver it to the customer, whether that's a warehouse, a retail store, or the end customer in the street. And that sounds simple, but I thought to myself, boy, that will take some doing. And here we are 8 years later. And I think it's fair to say that, DP World is certainly up there as one of the best and biggest logistics companies in the world. And if you think about that, in 8 years' time, going from 20,000 people to 120,000 people, I know of very few companies that can, say that.
That's typically more in the technology company like Facebook or those kind of
and
companies.
Amazon and people like that.
Yeah.
But in our space, certainly this growth is almost unheard of. So for me, it was a fairly simple task. Be it from being relevant to 12 or so customers to being relevant to millions of customers was the challenge. How do you become relevant? And it's all about that. And somebody said, Danny, you've kind of made DP World famous, but I think for me, it's not just about being famous, it's about being relevant, right? Why would people wake up in the morning and think about you? Why would people consider you when they need something moved from A to B? And how do you ensure that you stand at the front of the queue of relevancy before anybody else, your competitors, when the moment comes when somebody needs to think about you? And that's ultimately the challenge of communications and brand and reputation development. And then, of course, understanding your stakeholder network. is the biggest challenge as it keeps developing and it keeps changing, and as you open new markets and you acquire new customers, your stakeholder base changes, and with that changes the consideration of what they think about. And I remember having this chat with my team, many years ago when we talked about this topic of relevancy. And I said, one thing that nobody enjoys is when there is a conversation happening and one person does all the talking at that person, but not with that person or about that person, because that person will very quickly switch off. So for us, it's about having a communications conversation, if you will, that brings that stakeholder or customer or person of importance into the conversation. Why would they listen to you? Why would they be interested in you? And that is, I think, what we've tried to do over the last few years.
Yeah, and you have the role of the chief communication officer, but also the chief government relations officer. So I imagine a lot of your stakeholders are governments or government leaders. So who are your main stakeholders in your role?
Well, I think if we break it down into groups, ultimately, and most people would say that the two most important groups are your employees and your customers, right? You need customers. Without customers, you don't exist. But also without employees, you can't serve your customers. So those are the two main groups that we focus on. How do we keep our employees, who are our biggest brand ambassadors, if you will, with us? And again, if I'll walk through the stakeholder groups, and I'll come to government in a minute. But employees are very important because every single one of those people represents the company in one way, shape, or form. Whether you operate a forklift, whether you operate a ship, whether you're in the ports, whether you're driving a truck, or whether you're in the office, you will represent the company in one way, shape, or form. And what you do and what you say and how you behave will reflect, on the company if you're in the company's presence. So making sure that every employee is engaged in the journey that we're on and understands their role within it is really important. Secondly, making sure they feel part of that journey, because if you don't feel part of it, then you feel isolated and you feel disengaged, and that's not good. But also, I think creating a sense of purpose and belonging is really important. I think most people in a company need that. It's not just your paycheck. It's not just your colleagues. You need to feel that you belong to something and have a sense of pride. And then for our customers, of course, having the clarity of why would I engage with DP World? What can they do for me that others can't do? So this customer value proposition and being clear about that is really, really important. And engaging customers in a conversation. So what is it that you need? How can we help you? Is really important. And again, our chairman is always talking about the customer first. He every second word is customer. And he said, without customers, there is no company. And therefore, if we don't listen to customers and what their needs are and what is changing in the market or what they're facing as challenges, and if we're not prepared to answer those or be with those, then there is no company. So those are the two most important stakeholders, but I think every stakeholder in the ecosystem has a role to play. So you look at media, you look at influencers these days on social media, very important. And government, policy formers, regulators, civil servants, ministers, under ministers, secretaries of state, all have a role to play in how our industry is shaped and what our role is within that. And of course, we try to work with governments who are often our partners in concessions or in joint ventures to help them understand how a decision they may make will have an impact, for good or for bad, on the industry or on the company. And therefore, it's all about dialogue, having open conversations, having good relationships, first and foremost, and making sure that our points of view are well understood by those stakeholders. Doesn't always mean to say that they will make the decision that favors us. Of course not. But that's for a government to decide. That's not for us to decide. We can put a point of view across, and sometimes that's difficult. We've seen difficult moments around the world. Recently in the last few years in the UK, for example, with the challenges we had with P&O ferries. We've seen challenges in parts of Africa, for example, in Djibouti, which is very difficult, where governments make choices that we think are wrong. But at the same time, keeping dialogue open and using all the channels that you have available to ensure that people can see our points of view as well as the points of view of the industry is a very important part of what we do.
Quick break from the conversation. This episode is sponsored by Blue Energy Partners. The leadership team is doing something amazing and the company is growing fast. I really like their focus on leadership and leadership development, which is why I'm happy to have them as a sponsor for a podcast about leadership. So if you are in the marine fuel industry, this is a company to pay attention to. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast, and let's get back to the conversation.
Yes. So let me cut a little bit into more you as a person, as a leader, because I know that in your position you talk a lot on the behalf of the company, but I want to challenge you a little bit. So I imagine you also meet with very influential leaders, powerful leaders. And when you go into those meetings, you have a lot of responsibility because you're representing DP World, which is also a big company. How do you deal with that kind of pressure when you're meeting with these country leaders or government leaders that you meet with?
I think if I look back at my own leadership style and methodologies, I had the benefit of having some great people that I worked with early in my career and you know throughout my career. And one of the things that always dawned on me is, and one of my mentors used to say this is, have clarity of thought. Right? Don't open your mouth if you don't know what you're going to say, right? Because it'll come out the wrong way. It's far better to pause and make sure that what you're about to say in important meetings makes sense to the other person than to say something quickly that will come out the wrong way. So in communications, and it sounds rather obvious, what you say and how you say it can leave such an impression that that if, you know, it can do an enormous amount of good, but it can also do an enormous amount of damage. So, you know, both the written word and the spoken word is what you have to stand by. So if I look at my journey, you know, when you go into meetings, be clear about what the purpose of the meeting is, what the outcome should be on that side. And again, something that Sultan has always taught me is, whenever you go into a meeting for a particular purpose, make sure that both sides walk away with a win. And what he means by that is if you're trying to achieve something for the better good of the company, then both parties need to feel that that's a good outcome. Yeah. If one party feels it isn't the case, and we feel it is, then it's not a sustainable outcome, be it a contract, a deal, or an agreement, or whatever. So for me, I think the thing that I learned most is to be clear. I'm not often overawed by whoever sits on the other side of the table. Ultimately, we're all human beings, and we're all trying to do something for whatever entity we represent. I happen to represent DP World, but for me, it is all about, you know, common connection, common purpose, finding a way through whatever it is you're trying to find your way through, and being clear and concise in what it is you're trying to convey to that person.
That's very good advice, and I like this principle of Sultan Ahmed with thinking win-win. It reminds me of the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he talks about don't go in and seek compromise, because if you compromise, you're both giving away something and you're both losing a little bit. Yeah. But instead of that, think win-win. How can both of us go out from this? That's right. All right, very good. So let's go back to the very beginning, and the first time you found yourself in a leadership role. I know that might be a few years back. But how did you find yourself in that position? How did it happen?
I think in my first role in Shell, I inherited a team. Until then, I'd been part of a team, and I had 1 or 2 reports, but in a relatively sort of junior role, if you like. But my first leadership role came at Shell in 1999, and I remember on the first day of my job meeting my new team. I think there were about 15 or so people in the team, and I was introduced by the person who'd hired me. And I remember, and this is going to sound a bit strange, but I remember standing in front of all of them and introducing myself, and I felt very awkward in the sense that I thought everybody's looking at me. And that was the first moment where it dawned on me that whatever I do and whatever I say and however I behave is going to have an immediate impact on the impression they have of me, more so than in any other setting. And in the weeks and months that followed as I settled into the role, I began to realize what leadership responsibility really means, right? A lot of the staff rely on you for direction, rely on you for a sense of almost protection in many ways, right? If you work in a large conglomerate like Shell, you can feel like a very small fish in a very big pond. So that responsibility of leading a team and leading by example and setting the tone and setting the culture and the dynamic of the organization, it dawned on me how important that was. And I don't think in leadership journeys you can be prepared for that until you're actually in that position, right? You can read all sorts of books and have all sorts of mentoring sessions, but once you're in it and you work with real people, particularly a group of 15 to 20 or whatever it was, then you do feel, and there were plenty of nights where I came home and I didn't sleep so well, thinking, well, what's going on here, or what's the dynamic there, or why are these people not working together, or why is there a discourse in a particular project or part of the team. So dealing with that and coping with that and understanding that becomes a really important part of how you develop your leadership style, and I think that's part of what I learned in the early days.
So what would your advice be to someone, let's say we have a listener who is a new leader, also stepping into the first leadership role with maybe 10, 15 people, and having these doubts and thoughts and sleepless nights, what is a good recommendation for them?
I had a mentor, gentleman by the name of Neil Golightly, who was a few years ahead of me, obviously, and he had been the chief communications officer at Ford, at Boeing, at Shell as well. And he was a great mentor of mine, but he had sort of 3 very simple rules. And they may sound obvious, and you will have heard these before, I'm sure. Never make somebody do something that you wouldn't want to do yourself. That's an obvious rule. The second, he said, there are lots of overlaps between parenting and leadership, right? So how you behave as a parent towards your children will have a large effect on how your children will behave down the line. Well, in many ways, leading teams, people will behave in a very similar manner to how you behave yourself. If you set yourself up in a very negative stance and you're abrupt and rude and all these kind of things, well, that will rub off and reflect on the team as well. So your own personality and your own identity should shape how your team behaves and forms. So, and then the last one is really that you, as a leader, you need to be aware that people will constantly look at you, not just listen to you, but look at you. So body language, for example, is a really important thing. If you walk in the morning and with drooped shoulders and your chin on the ground, then immediately the team will think, oh boy, the boss doesn't look very happy, what's going on here? And it sets the tone for the day. So being very self-aware is very important, but also the culture and identity of the team that you create, over a period of time will have a large effect on how successful you are down the line in delivery. So I think it's really important to make people feel safe in a team, really included. And by that I mean they're clear as to what they need to do and how they fit into the team, and indeed that they feel satisfied with what they contribute to the team. And then performance, so being clear what excellent looks like. How do you ensure that people all understand what you're trying to achieve and why? And being, pride comes into that, being proud of how you can contribute to a team. And again, if you look at overlaps with sporting teams, in my time in New Zealand, the New Zealand All Black rugby team was seen as one of the greatest winning teams in any sport in the world. But their culture and the dynamic of that team and how they behave and how they fit into that ecosystem of excellence was an area that I looked at for my own leadership style. How can you make people feel part of a winning culture?
And that's very good advice, and I'm sure that these young leaders out here could learn a lot from that. And I think that's a little bit, preventative way of looking at it, right? You need to do these things as leaders to not end in a situation where you have those sleepless nights and, you have these worries all the time. But let's say you get to that point. What would be the first advice for someone who is there now, and this is my situation right now? I can't sleep at night and so on. What would be the first thing you would tell someone like that?
Well, actually, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a few sleepless nights, because it shows you care about what it is that you do. And I think the key to those early parts of the journey is that you have to figure the whole culture that you're trying to create. You have to figure that out yourself. You can take all sorts of pieces of advice from people, but ultimately you're the leader. You're there for a reason. You were chosen to lead a team, however big or small it may be. It could be 4 or 5, it could be 2,000 for all we know. But ultimately you were chosen for that reason. So if you're not confident and you don't exude confidence on day one about what it is that you do, again, the team will pick that up. They will pick up every single element of that. 2, figuring out what kind of dynamic and what kind of culture you want to create is not just important for yourself as a leader, but it's also going to set the tone for how the team can perform down the line. And then lastly, being really clear about what it is you're trying to do so that people feel part of that and feel part of that ecosystem, feel part of that journey. It's really important. I once had a conversation with a staff member who joined us, and after 3 months after their probation discussion, he said to me, Danny, I really like being part of the team, but the bit I'm still not quite sure about is where are we going? What is the end goal? He called it the Valhalla. Where are we going to be, at the end of it all? And I've thought about that for a minute, and I thought that's actually a failure on me. If I haven't made it clear after 3 months what this guy is supposed to do, I mean, he's here, he has a job description, he's fulfilling tasks every day, but he doesn't know where the end goal is, then I've not done something right. However nice the relationship may be, and he was enjoying himself and all these kind of things. So being clear about that and making sure that everybody knows where is the Valhalla, where are we trying to get to, makes a massive difference. And these are things you learn along the way. And by the way, if you'll have difficult moments many times along the way where staff members feel disenchanted for whatever reason, or feel disengaged or whatever. And I think it's also really important that you build a relationship with a staff member beyond the job scope. Right? I try to connect with people. I try to understand what happens outside their world. Not
where's the balance with that?
Yeah, there's
some leaders would say don't be personal with your employees, and some would say be best friends with them. So where's the balance?
I don't. We're all human beings at the end of the day, right? And I think it's important that you know a little bit about that person, and that you also share a little bit about your life. Where the balance lies exactly is very difficult to describe, and you have to remember what the relationship is to begin with. It's employee-employer. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't build a relationship on a personal front, right? How many children, cats, dogs, hobbies. And actually, the better the connection is, the greater the tolerance is between people. And what I mean by that is if there is an illness in the family, or there is a particular circumstance that may make it difficult for that person outside of the working environment, then there's a greater level of understanding, and therefore leniency, if you will, towards that person to know that they're going through a bit of a tough time. Now we need to put an arm around that person and help that person get through that tough period that's affecting their personal life, and which will inevitably have an impact on their working life. So the more you know, I think the better it is to build a relationship down the line.
Very good. So the first job you got was at Shell as a leader for 15 people. Did you apply for that job, or did someone knock on your shoulders and say this is for you?
So actually, my first role was in New Zealand for a company called Wycliffe Press, which was a business for manufacturing company, which was one of the largest in New Zealand at the time. And I had a boss there who was actually a really interesting character, and I'm still very good friends with him today. He still lives in New Zealand. He was the one who actually, had a lot of sort of leadership credentials or leadership style elements that I looked at and thought he's created this team of quite unique individuals. Because I remember thinking once, if this team were to stand in a restaurant or in a bar, for example, or in a coffee shop, I can't imagine that any of us would be friends, because we're so different in where we come from or what we do. but somehow he had created a sense of team that brought us all together. So my first role at Shell, which I had applied for, because I moved to the UK, I applied for this role, and I was actually surprised at the interview how well I clicked with the person who was interviewing me. It was for me, it was quite an important role. I really wanted this role, but I clicked straight away with this person, and actually walking away from that interview, without wanting to sound too arrogant about it, I thought to myself, I stand a really good chance of getting this job. I connect well with this person. And that's another really important thing, right? You can have a really good interview and you think you've brought yourself forward really well, you've represented yourself really well, you've got all your points across. But if you don't click with the person that's sitting on the other side of the table, then actually there is probably still a chance that you won't get that role. So for me, getting that role was a really important part of my leadership journey. And Shell is a fantastic company, huge company, big global presence. And because of that, I think, because of that journey, that 20-year journey that I had at Shell, that shaped a lot of what I do today at DP World.
And so when did you then find yourself in a position that was, now it's quite a senior role? It's not just I'm leading a team, but now I have a big responsibility. When was that in your career?
Well, when I came to DP World, I left behind at Shell a team of 45 or so staff, plus another 60 or 70 contracting staff as well. And at DP World, I kind of had to start again. I inherited a team of 8 or 9 individuals, and it required a big reshaping role, not just because DP World was transitioning from being a port operator to an end-to-end logistics company, going from 20,000 or so staff to 120,000 staff. It also required us to bring in skills and competences that would be relevant for the journey that we were to undertake. So it was a complete rebuild, if you like, of the communications infrastructure that exists today at DP World. I've used the analogy of kind of building the house while I live in it. I started perhaps with a small basement, and from that we built the ground floor, and then the first floor, and then perhaps even a top floor with bathrooms and kitchens and all these kind of things in it. But we had to keep building whilst we kept living, if that makes sense. So this journey at DP World was very much different in that way to Shell, because Shell was a very established company with rules and regulations, and the pace of doing things was set, and you couldn't really go against that, right? You had to follow that particular pace. If you tried to get outside that pace, it'd be very difficult to achieve anything. Whereas at DP World, whilst all the rules and regulations are the same and as tight and as strong as they were at Shell, the entrepreneurial spirit at the top of getting things done, at a faster pace, was something that took a little while to get used to. And I remember, thinking when I sat in my CCO role, at times I would sit with Sultan or Yuvraj Narayan, our deputy CEO and CFO, and explain things with a PowerPoint presentation. And within 30 or 40 seconds, they would turn to me and say, okay, well, what's your point? and I would say, well, if you'll allow me to go to the 21 slides, then I'll get to the point. But they would say, well, forget the 21 slides. Tell me what it is you want. And very quickly, I became aware that those type of methodologies that I was used to at Shell to show the thoroughness of thinking and how we would get to the end point was not so important. And what I learned from that is that there was a sense of trust. And I remember Sultan told me once, well, you are the chief communications officer. We trust you to do your job. That's why you're here in the first place. So just tell us what you're going to do and what you need in order to get it done and what the value from that is, rather than
the whole process.
Whole process. We trust the process. We just need to know the outcome. And Sultan is one of these people who, and Yuvraj is as well for that matter. They are people who value time. And time is something very important to them. So when you're in their office and you want to explain something, you need to be very concise in what's the scope of what I'm trying to tell them, what is the outcome going to look like, and why do I need a yes or a no from them? And we're talking seconds, not hours here, right? Yeah. So, and I think in many ways we talked about Ahmed bin Sulayem before. Ahmed is also one of these people who who's very efficient with his time.
I was just thinking of him when you said that. Yeah.
He's very, very efficient with his time. He'll be very quick to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it, and this is the outcome. Bang. And then we move away. I like that. I do.
There's not so much bureaucracy here, as you see in those big international, maybe Western companies.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean to say that there isn't the thoroughness of thinking. It's just the speed at which things get done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly one of my bosses, Yuvraj Narayan, is a very strategic and critical thinker. The way he thinks through a process and how he gets to an outcome, I admire a lot. And Sultan, in a very different way, is exactly the same. But the clarity of thought and knowing where to get to and how to get to it, that is the key to it all.
Nice. And so how big is the current organization that you're leading?
So we have a very interesting organization. So one of the things that we created is regional communications team. So we have a central head office team that serves very much as a function that supports all the business units in the world. And then in each of the business units in the regions, we have a communications team that reports into the local leadership team. So for the Americas, for Europe, for Asia, Africa, etc. It's really important that the communications team is part of that local or regional established team. Yeah. So if decisions are made at a regional level, then a communications leader needs to have a seat at the table. So the way we built it is that in each of these seats of each table in each of the regions, we have a leader sitting there advising the CEO, advising the local leadership on elements and matters related to communications and government relations, which is really, really important. Because I think if you don't have a seat at the table as a communications leader, you then become an afterthought, right? And a lot of what's so important, I think, is if I look at plenty of companies and some of my peers and other companies who report into another function or one or two levels removed from the top leadership. And it's much more difficult to influence or to advise or to help shape the direction of the company if you're in that position. Yeah. And one of the things I loved that Yuvraj and Sultan did for me is that I sit at the leadership level, I can help shape the direction of things. I can have conversations with them at any moment of the day. And I think that's a really valuable part of being a leader in a company, is that you can contribute at the highest level.
Yes, but I have a master's degree in corporate communications, right? So a lot of my peers from university, they are also building their careers now within corporate communication and so on. And we do see quite often that communication is not part of the group executive team in companies. So is that something you would recommend to companies, to have that as part of the executive team?
I think if you have an ambition to become a chief communications officer in a global company, and say one of the top 500 companies in the world, at the point of entry, either the interview or day one, you should insist on reporting to the highest leadership of the company, be it the chairman, the CEO, or whatever. Because if you don't, your journey will never be as easy as it would be if you did, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is, if you're constantly having to work through somebody else, another third party, in order to get your points across, I think a sense of frustration will set in, and you will find that your ability to influence and shape the agenda from a comms perspective and a brand and reputation perspective will be compromised in some way, shape or form. And again, if I look at our leaders at DP World, I have access to everybody, be it our chairman, Sultan, or Yuvraj, our deputy CEO and CFO, or all the other pillar leaders, for example, to be able to have a conversation or walk in their office at any given moment of the day and say, this is what I think we should be thinking about or doing, is so incredibly valuable. But it's also valued by them in reverse. If I didn't have that, I don't think I could have done the job that I've done today.
I agree with you. So obviously, having a communication background myself, I do believe it's crucial for any kind of organization at any size. But in numbers, how big is the organization that you are leading?
Okay. Well, on a global level, I think we have roughly 150 staff worldwide, plus a number of contracting support staff as well. Based in all the various regions, so scattered all over the world, from New York to Johannesburg, from Singapore, Delhi, to London, and of course Dubai, which is our headquarters. And numbers will only tell you one thing. It's what I'm really proud of is the quality of our staff. We've managed to attract, when I first started this journey, to attract the type of people that I wanted to bring in was difficult. I had to sell the journey of DP World. Well, today I don't have to do that anymore. I get some incredibly high quality people who want to work for DP World in communications and in government relations. So to have been through that journey of 8 years of trying to sell it to not having to sell it and people want to come and work for
But
you.
that must mean you have done a good job also in creating a strong brand around the company.
Well, I think another trait of leadership is to understand how you got here. And I'm lucky to have an incredible team. You have to have some luck when you acquire people and when you hire people. You meet people twice for 45 minutes, and based on that, you make a choice of the right person you hire. Well, it's relatively easy, particularly in communications, to say the right things for 45 minutes twice over, right? And then you find when the person joins the team and they're not quite what you thought they were, you have a problem. I've been lucky in bringing together a really good team, and it's the team who've delivered, the reputation and brand that currently exists for DP World. And DP World has not just built a brand on the back of partnerships and on the back of a good communication strategy, but we've also built strong relationships in the automotive world or in the pharma world or the FMCG world by the sponsorships and partnerships that we've created. And earlier I touched on the World Economic Forum, where we have a big presence each year. For us, it's a really important platform, not just to engage with key stakeholders in the industry, but also to show who we are and what we do to those key stakeholders in the industry. So those are the types of things that we've done over many years now that have built the reputation that we have today.
So I talk to a lot of top executives on my podcast, and from CEO of smaller companies, from founders, from billion-dollar founders of a very cool company in Denmark. One of the things that a lot of these leaders talk about is this, the imposter syndrome. Right? Sometimes they're thinking, why am I here? Do I deserve be here? Am I good enough for this? Does that sometimes occur to you? How did I end up in this position?
I think I talked a little bit about confidence.
Yes.
So what goes on in here, inside your heart and your mind, and what comes out needs to be two different things. Because remember, if you have a crisis of confidence, or you have this feeling that that you might not deserve to be somewhere, as soon as that comes out and your staff feel it or sense it or see it, I think you start to create doubt, not just within your own self, but also within your team. We've seen it recently with, if you think about the footballing world, we talked about that before, if a manager of a football club starts to talk openly, or either in the media or in an open forum, about the crisis the team is going through and that he's unsure of how to solve it, well, then the players will begin to believe it, the fans will begin to believe it, and the media will begin to believe it, and that's the shortest way out of a football club. In many ways, it's the same for a leader, right? So whatever crisis of confidence you might be going through, you need to internalize that and find ways of managing your way through that. That's where mentors and peers come in, where you can share those feelings with people who are in the same position as you are, perhaps in other companies, and that's why networking is so important, which we haven't talked about yet. But it's very much keeping that to yourself. Inevitably, there will always be moments where you doubt yourself. Have I made the right decision? Have I given the right advice? Have I done the right thing? And equally, in the last 8 years, there have been moments where I thought, oh boy, I don't think I've done the right thing, or have I done the right thing?
Yeah.
Or I think I've done the right thing, but I don't think the outcome is going to be the right one. But you have to battle your way through that and have the confidence and the I guess the willpower to want to stay with it and not give up on it.
So one of the things I remember back to my studies is one of the subjects we had in my master's was crisis communication. And I imagine you being in companies like DP World and Shell, the world is changing fast, a lot of things happening, and even the companies might go through some crisis. How do you handle these kind of, what's the process when there is a crisis? Do you prevent it before it happens, or what do you do when it actually happens?
I think the nature of a crisis is that, well, there are two bits to that. So we do a lot of training within the team on on how you manage a crisis. But one of the things I learned both at Shell and at DP World is that the types of crisis that ensues or that is created or that happens will never be exactly the same to what you might have trained for. Some of the competences and skill sets will come into it, but the unique circumstance which you find yourself in will always be of a nature or a way where you think, boy, I hadn't seen that coming, or I don't understand that, or how did that happen? So for me, if I go back and look at a particular crisis that happened 3.5 years ago at DP World, we had prepared for a particular event to occur. We had looked at all the permutations and scenarios that might be developed from that. And yet still something happened that we hadn't seen coming, or we hadn't quite understood, that came out of left field, that hit us. And you have to then deal with that in the moment, right? And then you have to draw upon your experience, the people around you, and all the things you've learned over the years, clarity of thought, keeping calm, thinking through the problem, don't make it worse by guessing, and all those things to make sure that what you do, has a positive outcome. And then even then, when it doesn't quite work out for you, is not necessarily to give up, because sometimes working your way through a crisis isn't a 1 day, 2 day, 1 week, 2 week thing. It might be years down the line by the time you fix something.
Yeah.
So patience is also a really important part. And I remember this particular crisis where we were going through a very difficult period with one of our companies in DP World, and we have hundreds of companies within DP World, or hundreds of business units, but this particular business unit had really suffered during COVID. It was losing money at a very large pace because of the issues. It was in the UK. Brexit had just happened. COVID had just happened, and literally the bottom of the business had fallen out because of these circumstances. So serious action needed to be undertaken in order to save the business. And one of the things I admire about Sultan and Yuvraj in particular is that they don't give up. They could easily have closed the business, sold the assets, and taken the easy route out. And many would have forgiven them for that. And I think many leaders in the world, when I look at it, the vast majority of leaders in the world might have taken that option and might have said, look, that's too difficult to do. We're not going to undertake that action. We're going to take the easy way out, which is to shut down the company, make 3,000 people redundant, sell all the assets, and cut our losses. But not our leadership. They felt that this company was worth saving, even though very difficult decisions needed to be taken. And you have to admire them for that. But when I did hear, when I was sat around the table and I was told, look, this is the plan, Danny, what do you think? I did think, boy, that's going to cause some raucous, that's going to create some impact in the media. And we focused heavily on media, unions, various other people that in the ecosystem. But it was actually the government of the UK who at the time came out and did something that we hadn't foreseen. And that caused us to rethink in mid-crisis, well, what did that mean?
Yeah.
How did that, even the Prime Minister was involved, Boris Johnson at the time. So those things were very difficult to deal with. And there were many moments throughout that process where I thought, why did I miss that? How did that go wrong? What can I do about it? Have I done the right thing? And even our own leaders were questioning, well, what's communications doing here? But eventually, we rebuilt the reputation, we rebuilt our relationship with the government, we rebuilt our relationships with media. And whilst it took time, you have to remember a crisis doesn't have a defined period of time. A crisis is never 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 weeks. It can take a lot longer before you get to the end game.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot from that particular. You learn a lot more from crisis and mistakes you make than you do
I
from
imagine.
other things.
Even in life.
Yeah.
Has there been any situation in your career, any tough moment that really taught you something valuable?
Gosh, many. I guess there are many moments where you get taught either a harsh lesson because you've made an error, or you go through a tough period where you may feel a little lost, for example. There were moments in my Shell career where, on the back of, some successful campaigns or projects, you went through a period of particularly if there was a restructure, for example, and Shell had a habit of going through restructures every 2 or 3 years, as the business and the dynamic of the business changed, where you felt a little bit lost in the journey itself. Where is all this going? How do I fit into it? So as an employee, but even as a leader, I was not sure where my leadership was going. And then it's very difficult to keep your staff motivated when you're not motivated yourself. And you have to then think, okay, well, my boss is not giving me what I need in order to feel engaged, empowered, enthused, passionate, but I can't let that happen to my staff, right? I cannot transfer that to my team, because if I lose them and I lose my boss, then I've lost everything. Yeah. So it's really important to begin as a leader to protect your team in some way from whatever may be going on above you. And there are moments where you have that, where you feel, I don't believe what we're doing is right, I don't understand what we're doing, or you're completely disconnected from what's going on, you're not aware. And somehow you still have to keep your team engaged, enthused, and passionate about what they do.
But that's great
that
you did that, because if your leader didn't do that to you, but you still had the leadership skills to protect your team from those feelings. So that's kudos to you for having that mindset already back at that time.
Yeah, I think, again, some of my mentors taught me that in the very early days, and I was lucky to have some really good mentors in the early days in Shell who gave me some really good sound advice that probably set the tone for my leadership journey as such.
Yeah. And talking about mentors, someone at your level, you talked about network earlier today. Who do you go to for advice? I know you have, of course, your own leaders when it's more business advice maybe. But what if you are standing in a situation you don't know how to handle it? Who do you go to for advice or mentoring?
I think I actually probably rely a lot more on past experience. I'm now in my late 50s, so I'm coming to the twilight years of my career.
You're still young.
Well, maybe, but it is at the end of your career, and you've got sort of 25, 30 years of experience behind you, and you can draw a lot from that, right? There'll be many instances where you've been where you can draw on that experience and say, oh yeah, at that stage I experienced this and I did that. So I still rely a lot on my network. Now it's more peers that I talk to, not just here in the UAE, but in Europe and North America, where I know I can pick up the phone to a number of individuals to say, I've got this problem, what would you do about it? That is just so incredibly valuable that you have to have that. I think as a leader, if you're sitting on an island all by yourself with your team and you have no one to talk to about the issues you face, boy, it must be a hard journey, right? Yeah. So I'm lucky to have a good network of people that I can pick up the phone to in different parts of the world who can give different perspectives. And sometimes I need to draw on 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of advice to then pick bits of each of those and work out, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
So network is very important at the top, because one of the things I'm hearing from my other guests is that sometimes it can be lonely on the top.
Yeah, it can be very lonely, right? If you're, I have Yuvraj and Sultan to talk to as my bosses, but I look left and right, and there isn't another one of me that I can talk to, right? So I don't need to look outside the company to say, I'm facing this issue, what would you do? Yeah. So it will be a very lonely journey if you don't have that network of people that you can rely on. There are also, for example, one of my good friends and colleagues is Boutros at Emirates Airlines. So he does what I do at Emirates. Now he's been around a little bit longer than I have, and he's been there, done it all. Built the Emirates brand that we see today, which is one of the most admired, I think, and loved brands of any kind of company, never mind airlines, in the world. Yeah. So I often ring him and say, Boutros, what would you do, in this situation? And his sort of forthright advice, I really like. He's very blunt and he's very direct, and he'll say, well, if I'm about to do something that isn't right, or he'll say, Danny, that's a stupid idea, I wouldn't do that. This is what I would do.
And you won't have your employees saying that to you in the same way.
No, indeed, but you need somebody to tell you the truth, right? If you are about to undertake something that is not the right thing to do, you don't want somebody to mumble around it and to try and redirect you, and you're thinking, what is he trying to say to me? Whereas you need people who are honest with you and will tell you to your face that's not the right thing to do, or it's a dumb idea, or whatever. Because if you don't have that, you will make a mistake, and then it'll cost you. So you have to build that network of people who are peers, but also mean, Bitros is very independent in that sense, right? I can talk to him and he will just tell me direct, don't do this, do that, because he has no axe to grind. He has no, it won't affect him per se. So he can just say it how it is, and that's what you need.
Yeah. So if you're looking at someone a rising leader, a rising star, what would you say are the key skills or capabilities needed to reach the level you're in right now? And the reason I'm asking this, as I said earlier, many of my peers are have this background of corporate communication, and they see your career as aspirational. So what would you say is the most important thing to develop in your journey and at my age, in mid-30s?
I think if you at your level now, competences and skill sets will be taken for granted almost. Well, people, as you go through this journey, you will be expected to be competent and well skilled in these things. So therefore, your personality and your values and principles that you bring with it will be the differentiator. So I think you have to have a number of things in your arsenal, if you like, of tools. So things like authenticity, things like a personality that is engaging and at all levels. You have to almost be a chameleon in many ways in doing, being the chief communications officer, because 1 minute you're talking to a journalist, then you're talking to a staff member, then you're talking to a government minister, then you're talking to a customer, then you're talking to a policy former or a regulator. So there are so many different ways you have to set yourself up, because each of these people will have a different angle to impact your company. So, but at the same time, you still have to be authentic and you still have to be clear and concise in what you're doing. So I think the leadership development element is, as a chief communications officer, you're expected to have certain competencies and skills. That's a given, right? If you don't have those, well, you won't be getting here anyway. But the differentiator to get to being a chief communications officer will be about how you represent yourself, what you can bring, the type of personality that you have. You have to have a very thick skin, right? You will get what I call plenty of free advice from around the organization. Everybody thinks they can do my job better than I can, I'm sure. But at the same time, you also get some really good feedback at times. So, it's...
I have a very interesting question I thought about last night, actually, because we see and we hear a lot about AI taking jobs, right? And AI cannot replace someone's authenticity and personality and so on. But I guess in communication, there will be a lot of things that AI can take from you. So do you think that AI is going to replace the chief communication officer role at some point? Or do you think that that's not going to happen?
I remember in the late 90s when, the internet was developing into a massive piece of global infrastructure. People said, well, jobs will disappear. People will be left out of jobs, be it in communications or otherwise. I think AI is going to complement and change the way communication officers operate over the next decades. So we see with things like ChatGPT, for example, you can put in a topic and out comes a whole speech or a whole press release. So I don't think it's about replacing, it's about complementing. Yes. I think these tools, if we embrace them in the right way, will mean that we can do things better, faster, but in a way, not just better and faster, but in a way it'll evolve into something that will allow us to think about how we can exploit the competences and skill sets that we bring in a much better way. Yeah. If I think about today, if I'm writing a speech for Sultan, I may well spend a half day on it. If I can do such a thing in 10, 15 minutes, well, imagine how many of these speeches I could write or do or create for our leadership, and therefore I have more time to do the other things that I kind of don't have time for. I just think it makes us more efficient and more effective.
Yeah, I heard in a radio podcast something. At some point, one guy, he said something very interesting about AI. He said, AI is not going to replace your job, but someone using AI will. So it's about making it complement your skills already and your work and so on.
I agree. I think a lot of these tools are about, you have to embrace it first and foremost. Embrace it and look at how can this make me a better leader, communicator, practitioner, and how can I use that to my advantage? That's how you should look at it. Not to be afraid of it, or not to start talking about, well, it can replace me or it can replace other people. I just think as the company grows, if you think about it, and we had this discussion in my team not so long ago, I have a team of 30 or 40 or so in headquarters. I could imagine with those same 30 or 40 people in years to come, we can be 2 or 3 or 4 times more productive with the tools that are coming on stream in the AI segment, which means that we can create 3 or 4 times more value than we do today with the new tools that are coming along. Yeah. I think that's a fantastic thing. So it's not about replacing people. It's how can we do more with the same resources rather than the other way around.
Yeah. All right. So a question that I find very interesting. Do you think that you can see in someone early in their career that they are going to reach top level?
I think you develop that over time as well. You develop a sense of he or she is going to be a great leader. So, you know, I look at my team now, and there are several individuals within the team that I look at and think, I can't wait to see how they develop over the next 20 years. And as I retire in a few years' time, I'm going to really look forward to sitting in my chair at home and watching those people develop into what kind of leaders they can become, be it in communications or otherwise. That's one of the things I'm actually really passionate about is developing talent within the team, and particularly in young people. If you recognize something in them and you think, wow, that's really special. Yeah. I get really excited about developing people, and I look at some of my young Emirati colleagues at the moment. The Emirati population here is a population, a young population, if you think about it, that has the sort of the next generation, let's put it that way, of young Emiratis that are coming through now are highly skilled and educated, but also have a much more global outlook, I guess, than previous generations may have had. So I look at some of my colleagues at the moment, not just other foreign nationals, but also Emiratis who I'm really excited about, and I can't wait to see how they develop over. And I may have a small part to play in the next few years, but of course leadership develops over decades, not just years. So.
Yeah. And as we're coming to an end here, and as you also mentioned, in a few years' time, you will also have to retire at some point. What is the legacy you would like to leave behind?
Well, I have a really good answer to that. I've always felt that when I walk out of the door of DP World on a Friday night, if on Monday morning the department keeps going and nobody misses me, and weeks after that I'm an afterthought, then I've done my job well. That means that I've left a team in place capable of keeping the machine moving. The stitch is not dropped, nothing is missed, and people move on with that journey as if I was there. Then I think you've done a really good job. If you walk out and chaos ensues and people feel lost and that there's almost a lull, where a new leader has to pick up and 3 or 4 months of momentum are lost, that will have a massive effect on the CEO, the CFO, and other leaders who are then feeling a little bit aggrieved that, oh boy, this guy left and now it's messy and so you want to leave almost unnoticed when nobody's noticed that you've gone, and months down the line people say, oh, where has he gone? I haven't seen him for a while. Oh, he's retired. Okay, well, nobody's noticed. So to me, that's what I want to achieve.
But that's probably more in a metaphorically kind of way. I imagine that of course you also want them to remember you as a great leader, as a good person, and all of that thing.
That you do hope that, but that's for other people to judge, of course, not for you to for you to want. But for me, professionally, if the team can carry on without noticing that I've gone, that would be the greatest compliment. If somebody were to ring me to say, hey, I was looking for you and I can't find you. Well, I left 6 months ago. Did you not notice? And they'll say, no, we didn't notice. Well, then that's probably the biggest compliment you can have.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I really like that. So I had one more question before we round up. Yes, so overall, is there anything that you think about leadership that we haven't touched upon? Anything that you would like to say, this is great leadership, or this is what I believe about leadership?
I think, I guess the one thing on what I admire about great leaders is some great leaders are great orators as well. So great communicators of the spoken word. And I think it's really important that you have an ability to to stand in front of your people, be it your team or your colleagues or whoever it is, and be really clear about what it is that you want to convey as a leader.
Yes.
And I see many people using big words, jargon, complicated language, and I've seen many of those leaders over the years who I think try to impress by using certain words. But I might pick out one leader in particular. Shell used to have a CEO by the name of Jeroen van der Veer, who was in the early 2000s. He took over the leadership of Shell Transport and Trading and Royal Dutch Shell as it amalgamated into one company. And what I used to love about him is how clear and concise he was in the way he spoke. And I remember at one town hall where journalists were invited, he had a very strong Dutch accent. And Shell had gone through a particularly difficult period. And mistakes had been made at the top level. And of course, journalists were interested in understanding, well, A, would heads roll, and B, what was he going to do about it as the new leader? And I remember when journalists said to Jeroen, Jeroen, all these, issues and problems that Shell have had, how are you going to ensure that, these things don't happen again? And he looked at his journalist straight in the eye and he said, my friend, only a donkey kicks the same stone twice. And the whole room erupted with laughter. And what he really meant by that is, you can make one mistake and learn from it, but you can't make two. And what I loved about Jeroen is he was very clear. He used very simple language, but nobody was ever in any doubt about what he meant or where he wanted to go. And I love that about him.
Yeah, and that's a very good advice. And as someone who teach leaders communication, I don't usually advertise my business here, but I think you just hit spot on what it's so important for a leader to be very clear on the message that they're sending and the words that they're using. And even earlier you talked about body language and so on. So it's very nice for me to sit with a top executive that also has a communication background. I really enjoyed this conversation. And as you know, at the end of my podcast, I always ask my guests if there is a great leader out here in Dubai that could be a great leader to have on my podcast.
Gosh, there are many. But I think if I had to nominate somebody, and I mentioned him early on, would be Boutros Boutros, who's the Chief Marketing Communications Officer at Emirates.
Yes.
I admire him a lot, not just for what he's done and what he's delivered, but also who he is as a person. He's very authentic, he's very direct, he's very blunt, but also very clear, and his results speak for themselves.
Yes. That's awesome. And I imagine someone in his position gets a lot of emails and so on, messages. So maybe you can help me get in contact.
I'm sure I can connect you, yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.